पॉश एक सिक्योर एंड टेंशन फ्री वर्किंग एनवायरनमेंट क्रिएट करता है। गिल्टी एम्प्लॉयज के खिलाफ क्विक एक्शन ली जाती है। पॉश एक्ट से लीगल कंप्लायंस इंश्योर करता है कि कोई लीगल डिस्प्यूट्स या पेनल्टीज ना लगे। इससे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की गुडविल प्रोटेक्ट होती है, एम्प्लॉय रिटेंशन में सफलता प्राप्त होती है। हेलो एंड वेलकम टू इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ लीगल एंड मैनेजमेंट स्टडीज, इंडिया's premier legal and management education portal. Get certified to enhance employability. Today we are going to discuss about some landmark judgments related to Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, popularly known as PoSH Act. But before we move ahead, I would recommend you to watch the previous video made on the importance of PoSH Act. Link for the same will be mentioned below in the description box. So do check it out. And also, let me tell you, you will not find any other in-depth video related to the case studies of PoSH Act. So don't miss even a single part of this video. With this, let's start with the video. In the previous video we discussed what is the PoSH Act, where does it apply, and what is the importance of this act. In this video, we will discuss about the landmark judgments. First case is Vishaka and Others versus State of Rajasthan, also known as the Bhanwari Devi case. It was a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court of India in 1997 that established guidelines for the prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace. The case arose from a complaint by a group of women's rights organizations, including the Vishaka Association, after a social worker named Bhanwari Devi was gang raped in 1992 while trying to prevent a child marriage in Rajasthan. The Supreme Court held that sexual harassment at the workplace violates the rights of women guaranteed under the Indian Constitution and international conventions. The court further held that the state has a duty to prevent such harassment and to provide effective remedies to victims. To that end, the court issued guidelines for the prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace, which includes the creation of complaint committees at the district and state levels, the adoption of a code of conduct for employers, and the training of employees on the issue of sexual harassment. The Bhanwari Devi case had a significant impact on women's rights in India, as it recognizes sexual harassment as a form of gender-based violence and established legal remedies for its prevention and redress. The case remains an important precedent in the fight against sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence in India and around the world. Second, Medha, Kotwal, Lele and Others versus Union of India and Others. This is a case that was decided by the Supreme Court of India in 2018. The case arose from a petition filed by a group of women's rights activists, including Medha, Kotwal, Lele, challenging the constitutionality of PoSH Act 2013. The petitioners argued that the PoSH Act was insufficient to protect women from sexual harassment at the workplace, and that it failed to provide adequate remedies to victims of such harassment. They argued that the Act did not adequately address issues such as the role of third parties in facilitating sexual harassment, the need for protection against online harassment, and the need for gender-sensitive training for members of internal complaint committees. The Supreme Court rejected the petitioners' arguments, holding that the PoSH Act was constitutional and that it proved sufficient protections to women against sexual harassment at the workplace. The court further held that the Act was in line with India's international obligations under the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. The Medha Kotwal Lele case is significant because it reaffirmed the importance of PoSH Act in protecting women from sexual harassment at the workplace and provided guidance on the Act's application in practice. The case remains an important precedent in the fight against sexual harassment and other forms of gender-based violence in India. Third case, Tuka and Others versus State of Maharashtra, popularly known as Mathura case. This was a criminal case that was decided by the Supreme Court of India in 1979. The case arose from an incident that occurred in 1972, in which a young woman named Mathura was allegedly raped by two police officers at a police station in Maharashtra. Mathura's family filed a complaint against the police officers who were charged with rape and other offences. The trial court acquitted the officers, stating that Mathura had consented to sexual intercourse with them. Mathura's family appealed the decisions to the High Court, which also upheld the acquittal. The case was then appealed to the Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of Mathura and ordered the police officers to be retired. The court held that the evidence in the case indicated that Mathura had not consented to sexual intercourse with the police officers, and that the trial court had erred in finding otherwise. The Mathura case is significant because it established the principles that a woman's consent to sexual intercourse must be obtained through clear and voluntary communication, and that the absence of physical resistance does not necessarily indicate consent. The case remains an important precedent in the fight against sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence in India. Fourth, State of Maharashtra versus Madhukar Narayan Mardikar, also known as Mardikar case. This was a criminal case that was decided by the Supreme Court of India in 1991. The case arose from a complaint by a woman named Manorama, who alleged that she had been raped by Madhukar Narayan Mardikar, a police inspector, while in police custody. Mardikar was charged with rape and other offences. The trial court convicted him and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Mardikar appealed the conviction to the High Court, which upheld the sentence. Mardikar then appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld Mardikar's conviction and sentence, stating that the evidence in the case established that he had raped Manorama while she was in police custody. The court further held that the rape occurred in a police station, made it a particularly heinous crime, as it undermined the trust that the public places in the police. The Mardikar case is significant because it established the principle that the police have a duty to protect the right of individuals in their custody, and that they are liable for any violations of those rights. The case remains an important precedent in the fight against sexual violence and other forms of abuse of power in India. Fifth case, Independent Thought versus Union of India and Others. This is a case that was decided by the Supreme Court of India in 2017. The case arose from a petition filed by a non-profit organization called Independent Thought, which challenged the constitutionality of an exception to the Indian Penal Code that allows a husband to have sexual intercourse with his wife if she is between the ages of 15 and 18. Independent Thought argued that the exception violated the rights of young girls to equal protection under the law, as it allowed for sexual exploitation of minors. The organization argued that the exception was discriminatory and violated international conventions on the rights of the child. The Supreme Court agreed with the Independent Thought and struck down the exception, holding that it was in violation of the rights of young girls to protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. The court stated that the exception was, quote, arbitrary, capricious, whimsical, and violative of the rights of the girl child. The Independent Thought case is significant because it established the rights of children, including the right to protection from sexual exploitation and abuse, and that it must be given priority over cultural and traditional practices. The case remains an important precedent in the fight against child marriage and other forms of gender-based violence in India. क्या आपको ह्यूमन रिसोर्सेज में करियर बनाना है? किसी बड़े मल्टीनेशनल कॉर्पोरेशन या स्टार्टअप में काम करना चाहते हो या एक लेबर लॉ एक्टिविस्ट बनना चाहते हो तो आपको सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट एट वर्क प्लेस का सर्टिफिकेट कोर्स जरूर करना चाहिए। ये कोर्स आपको क्लियर अंडरस्टैंडिंग देगा कि सेक्सुअल हैरेसमेंट के अंडर कौन से एक्ट्स फॉल करते हैं। इसके साथ ही आपको पॉडकास्ट मिलेंगे जहां पर आप रियल लाइफ सिनारियोज और एग्जाम्पल्स के साथ केस स्टडीज पढ़ सकते हैं। 1 month ड्यूरेशन, सिंगल एग्जामिनेशन, नो मिनिमम एजुकेशनल क्वालिफिकेशन, improves employability, prepared by industry experts, no fixed timing, ऑनलाइन सर्टिफिकेशन, इनोवेटिव कंटेंट और लाइफ टाइम एक्सेस। इसके साथ ही आपको पॉश पॉलिसी के ड्राफ्ट टेम्पलेट्स मिलेंगे और पॉश की लाइव ट्रेनिंग के वेबिनार भी होंगे। तो आपको ILMS एकेडमी का ये सर्टिफिकेट कोर्स जरूर करना चाहिए और ये आपके लिए अवेलेबल है मात्र 4,500 रुपए के डिस्काउंटेड प्राइस पर। तो जल्द से जल्द ILMS एकेडमी की वेबसाइट को विजिट करें। इस वीडियो को देखने के लिए धन्यवाद।